I thought it would be worthwhile to spend a little bit of time going through some of the query capabilities of Xano. I've come up with a little bit of a scenario to work with just so that there's some context. What I'm looking at is an overview where events can be grouped by category and have multiple time slots per event. And the reason I'm picking that is I think there's a lot of different circumstances in apps that get written where you might have, let's say, a fitness app, and you have many fitness classes, and each of those classes can be associated with a category. And obviously, each of those classes can have many time slots. In other words, a Pilates class might happen once a week over the next 6 months. So you would have one event, which is a Pilates class, associated to a category. And if it's once a month over 6 months, you would have 6 time slots. So we're going to use that as the type of scenario. You might have date night as an approach. You might have concerts as approach. You might have meetups. There can be anything where you categorize and have time slots. So to start with, let's go into Xano and take a look at the database that we have. So like I'd mentioned, we're going to have category, which is your high level grouping. And I've got Pilates, weights, and aerobic as the categories of fitness classes. And then the event as just a generic term. You'll see I've got category ID as a column. And it has a couple of Pilates. It has a couple of weights and a couple of aerobics. And so that's what we're going to be working with for the events. And then each event, so we've got events 1 through 6. Each event can have time slots. So you'll see here where I'm linked to the event ID, and I've just picked the first 3 events. And then you have a start date and time and an end date and time. And so what you'll see is on January 12th, from 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock was event number 1. If we go back over here, that would mean Jill's Pilates for beginners. So this is kind of the data structure we're looking at. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I think this can be used for a lot of different calendared type activities. And so I wanted to show some of the query options you have to pull this data back, depending on how you're going to build your front end. Okay, so let's go ahead and get out of some of my debugging. Most of what we're going to do, if not all of it, is going to be in the get event query all records API. And I'm starting here. If I deleted all of my testing, I should have just what will bring back a full list. So if I run and debug, no input parameters, this brings back everything from the event table. And if you were to do this as it is, that means your user interface, be it web or mobile, would be stuck doing all the filtering. And that's not really efficient, because that means when you have a list of hundreds or thousands of events, you're going to have to pull all those back and then make your user interface do the filtering. And the user interface, be it a browser on a laptop or a smartphone and a mobile app, has less processing power than the servers at Xano. So the goal is you want to do as much of the work in the servers as possible and just give the user interface what it needs to help the user go from screen to screen and pick what they're looking to do. So let's come back to my to-dos just so I don't forget. We're going to get a list of events, which I just showed you. That's everything. And then I'm going to add in getting a list of events filtered by a category, and then a list of events that are filtered by category, as well as a start and end date. And the thought behind this is that the user interface would allow somebody to decide if they want aerobic exercise and between what dates are they looking for that activity to happen. and the app would return to them just a list of the events, the aerobic events happening between the date range that they specified. So let's go ahead and start building that out. The first thing I need to do is, since we want to filter by category, I need to make it possible to pass in a category ID. Now, this is assuming that your mobile or web app will be aware of the category list, which they would just call the category API to get that. And they would put in the ID. We could also, and I'll go ahead and put that on our list, we could also do category search by text filter approach. Just so I don't forget. And so this means that we're expecting a number being passed in that's a category, and then we're going to add query down here, going to add a conditional, and we're going to start with the event, and we want category ID, and then that's going to equal the input of category ID. So at this point, I'm going to save, and when I run this, you'll now see that in the run and debug, it's asking me for a category ID, so I'm going to pick ID number 1. And now you see that we just get back Pilates for beginners and advanced Pilates. If I were to come out and look at my database of categories, if I wanted the aerobic, I would pick ID number 3. Let's go back and just do that to see that we're getting the correct stuff. There we go, walk and talk and a HIIT workout. So we now know that if someone on the user interface were to pass back a category ID, we would just send to them the events that are occurring, that are available in that category. But let's say that's not going to quite get us there. Let's say that I also want to be able to do it for certain days, weeks, months. I want a date range, and I only want aerobics in a certain date range. So if I wanted to do that, what I need to do is add some additional filters, inputs as it would be. I guess I keep calling them filters. And we would have date start as a timestamp. Pick another timestamp, and it'll be date end. So now I've got a start and end date. All I need to do is come back into my query. I'm going to add, in addition to the category ID, the database event. Oh, no, I'm not. Okay, see, this is where I get ahead of myself, and I even knew what I was supposed to do. We need to fix this join here, because what I meant to say was to do date start and date end. That's not actually a part of the main event table. You have to go to time slot to get that. And there is an ID in event and an event ID in the time slot that link those two. So what I need to do is come up here and do a join. And all the join is going to do is say, for every item in the event table that matches this soon to be added condition, I want to link it to the time slot. And an inner join means that I only want the results that have both an event row and at least one time slot row, if not more. So I'm going to go ahead and say for the event ID, it needs to equal the time slot event ID. Okay, so at this point I have a join, and if I run this, here we go, I now have to put in a date range. I don't think I'm using those yet, and they're probably optional. Nope. Look at that, I got ahead of myself. So let's go ahead and do this the correct way. Let's put in 2021 01 01 and 2021 02 27. Inner join, time slot. Looks like I created myself a problem. Let's come take a look at our inner join here. Event. Let's delete and delete. Looks like I have one time slot. Try this one more time and see what I'm missing. Event ID equals time slot. Match them up on event ID. We're going to save that. I'm going to get rid of these for the moment to make sure I'm not trying to use something that I shouldn't. Okay. So what I have, so when I run this, there we go. When I have a 1, I'm getting back, the category of 1 brings back the event ID of 1 and 2. So we're good there. And if I now go into my query all records, and I go into output, just to show you what this join does, because there was no difference in that result compared to what we got before we did the join. But if I go into output and come down to the bottom to evals, this allows me to pick fields out of the joined table. So you'll see I don't just have the event information, but I also have the time slot because I did the join where I matched IDs. So I'm going to pick a start date, and I'm going to also add end date. So this is the start time, date and time, and end date and time of each of the returned rows for the events. So when we run this, you will see that I now have event ID 1 twice, event ID 2, I have 3 times, and I'll show you why and then give you a way to work with that. If you notice, I have 2 time slots for event ID 1, and I have 3, these 2 and this one down here, for event 2. So the query is working exactly like it should, but if you wanted to show this information on the screen, you would end up with Jill's Pilates for Beginners showing up twice, and Advanced Pilates as a title showing up 3 times. And probably what you would prefer is to be able to show Jill's Pilates for Beginners once with 2 time slots. And I can show you what it looks like to do that. The situations where you'd want to use the eval is going to typically be where you maybe have a 1-to-1 match between 2 tables, and you want to bring in additional data from that second table. As opposed to what we have here, it's a 1-to-many match. And so using the join with the evals on a 1-to-many match doesn't work as well for how the UI is going to want to consume that data. So let's go ahead and show you what it looks like to group a set of time slots per returned item. So I'm going to first get rid of the evals because I don't have a 1-to-1 match. I have a 1-to-many. And so typically it's going to be best to do what is considered an add-on. So just as kind of a break in my diatribe there, we are in this one, get a list of events filtered by start and end date. And before I even get too far into the start and end date, I'm showing you the join, the eval, and now we're going to talk about add-on and distinct. Okay, so if I want to get back a list of events and their time slots, I have another option, which would be to use an add-on. So normally we're working in the filter section. And working in the filter section, you'll see that we typically have the joins to other tables that we can bring in related data, like we're doing with events and time slots, as well as the query, which is identifying what range of the rows we want to bring back, be it by category, time slot, or other mechanisms. This allows us to get less of the table back for the user interface. But what's important in the output is, and I'm getting kind of slow, there we go, it came up. What's nice about the output is they allow you per row returned to call what's called an add-on. And so with that, I get to, uh-oh, there I go. I already have one built, so let me undo that because I forgot to delete it. And we are going to rebuild it so I don't get to cheat. Do that. Okay. We're going to pretend that was not there. So coming back to the get event, going to query all records and back into the output, we want to get, for this event, a list of all the time slots. We click on the add-on button. We're going to create a new add-on. We want to connect to time slots. We want to get back a list of items. You could have, I mean, obviously a single item is kind of speaks for itself. You could also just get an item count. So let's say you were doing some sort of e-commerce or maybe chat, and you wanted to have a number of conversations that a user has had. You could just get back the count of the conversations and then use that in your user interface. Or if you just want to know if something exists, or if you want to aggregate, which is, let's say you wanted to have it do an average or a sum or a min or a max value. I think it has min and max, but I know average and sum and things like that. But we want none of those, even though they're very useful in different scenarios. We simply want a list of the time slots. And we want to match based on the time slot event ID, because we're matching it to the event row. And so we're going to leave everything else like it is, and we'll talk about distinct a little bit later. So at this point, I should get time slot of event. We'll just leave it to what they defaulted. Okay, so we had clicked on the add-on, and now we've added in this section called time slot of events. And if we click on this red button, we'll go back in to the add-on where we could make changes if we wanted to. But we're going to go ahead and save this. And now when I run it, I'm still going to get the Pilates category, which is number 1. But now what you see is we have a whole new section in this called time slot of event, which is what we named it in our add-on definition. So, oops, I collapsed that. So you'll see that Jill's Pilates for beginners, like we've seen already, has 2 time slots with start and end times. And then Advanced Pilates has 3 time slots. So at this point, you've got the ability to have a unique listing of Jill's Pilates for beginners, only listed once, and then you get a list of all the time slots. And the same with Advanced Pilates. But let me show you why you get it listed so nicely there. And this will make sense hopefully here in a sec, because by default, when I go into the query records and I go into the output and I come down to the bottom, here is distinct. And if I look at that, we're getting back a list, but it automatically detects if there's duplicates and avoids showing you the duplicates. If I disable that and re-save and then rerun, let's look at the different result we get. So now you'll see that we have event 1 show up twice, once for each time slot, plus our add-on ran for each of them and got both time slots and associated to it. So this is not the way you'd want to do it, but I wanted you to understand what the distinct does and how it works for you. Here we're going to have ID2 show up with its 3 time slots 3 times. If there was an ID3 with 4 time slots, ID3 would show up 4 times, each of them showing the 4 time slots. So the reason that is happening is because of this join. When I join 2 tables, go over here. When I join two tables and we're looking at time slot, and I have two events, one event represented by event ID number 1 and 2 time slots for it. When I join these tables, what I end up with on an inner join is the event and its time slot showing up for this one, and then this event and this time slot showing up for this one. That's the reason you get 2. What Xano has done to make this much easier to deal with, because a majority of the time you're not going to want to return the way this looks. You're not going to want to return to a user interface multiple instances of ID 1. Because if I'm doing the user interface, I think I'm going to get this back and just show everything that is there. And I would show Jill's Pilates twice, each with the same 2 time slots. So what Xano has set up, which makes life much easier, is in the output, what I undid, I will redo. Still leave it at list, but I want it to automatically detect the fact that my high level, if this section here, ID name created at category ID, if this section has the same content as another row returning, then it will get rid of the duplicate. And so when we rerun this now, I get ID 1 once and ID 2 once, each with their own time slots represented. Time slots showed up because of the add-on we built. And so now if I were to send this back to a request from a user interface, it would simply show Jill's with 2 slots and advanced with 3. And I wouldn't have to have the user interface eliminate the duplicate high-level events. Pardon me. So hopefully that makes sense on what an add-on will do for you. An add-on will create it in the output. An add-on allows you to get back a list or an aggregate or an existence of information in a separate table that is associated with this table. And the reality is you could probably even associate a table to itself, but we're going to leave that out of this discussion and leave that for a later one. The goal usually is I have an event type item and multiple time slots. I mean, that's the perfect use for this. You could also do it with a category and a list of the events, so you could back up a level. So that gives us the ability to do add-ons, and it gives us the ability to either make it distinct or not distinct based on what we looked at. I also want to show you that even though we created the add-on from the output tab here, you can create add-ons from the library in the add-on section, because this is the one we created. And you can come into the full add-on capability like I just did, and you can actually add in as much logic to this as you want to. You could add in API calls, you could add in the creation and update of variables, any amount of business logic you wanted to put to that add-on, you can do by coming in here. If you just want the simple interface to the add-on like we were doing, then in the API, you can do it from the query all and the output. So just something to keep in mind, the add-ons end up being very robust in how much you can add in the way of logic. And this add-on gets executed for each event, because I am doing a query all records for event. So anything that has a category of 1 will have the add-on run. So when it gets Jill's Pilates for beginners, it runs that add-on that we have. And then when it gets advanced Pilates, it runs the add-on again and associates the data. So it really allows you to easily enrich the original event information that's there. Okay, so let's come back over here, start and end date. So we wanted to be able to filter based on dates. That actually, compared to what we just went through, is going to be pretty straightforward. We are going to add the timestamps back in, date start and date end. And now what I want to do, since I'm passing in dates, I want to come back into the query filter, the where clause, and I'm going to add in the ability to do the start and end dates. So I'm going to, for the time slot that we're joined to, the only way this works is the fact that you have it joined so that you can see it. And then I am going to do the start date. And the start date needs to be greater than or equal to the start date that I passed in on the input. And then I need to make sure that, am I getting my, there we go. And then on this one, for the time slot, I want the end to be less than or equal to what I'm passing in on input for the end. So this means that the timestamp needs to be in between, I guess, the total time of the event, that's the way to put it. The total time of the event needs to fall within the start and end date I've passed in. So even though I have events that are on the same day and just the start and end is an hour apart, you could actually have start and end dates. Maybe it's for a vacation adventure and it's a 3-day event vacation. Your start and end dates would have to be able to surround the full start and end dates of the events for them to show up. But mine are just single day, single hour events. Okay, so now we've got that filter in place. If I run and debug, we're still going to do category 1. I'm going to add in that I want any event that occurs between now and towards the end. I think everything will fit in there. There we go. So I'm getting back both Jill's and advanced. So let's see what my time slots are. We're going to go to the time slot table. Event ID 1 and 2 is what we're interested in. And I'm going to filter them to be just up to the 13th. Because if I do that, actually, I'm going to change this to be 14. The reason I'm doing this is I want to eliminate one of these coming back. So now, event 2, this is past the 12th of January, this is past the 12th of January, and now this is. As is event 1, but I will find one of them here. So event 1 should be the only one that shows up when I put the date here to be a 1/15. And it is not. Isn't that a bummer? Let's go look at what I did wrong. How about we do that? January 14th. Oh, that's silly. Let's make it the 13th. That's just because I did it wrong. Because obviously that is what I want. Make sure I got my dates right. Yeah. So the 13th. There we go. So now I only get back Jill's Pilates, but now you're going to notice another problem that we want to dig into a little bit. Even though I've got the category limiting it correctly, great, and the start and end date worked because, partially, because I didn't bring back any of the event 2 items, because these are all past January 13th, as you can see. This one just barely passed. But I showed both of these for event 1 in the add-on. And so I would consider that incorrect for a user interface, because once again, the user interface is going to have to deal with that. I put in January 13th as a filter, but our add-on doesn't know anything about that. And that's why it shows up here. So let me kind of walk you through what this means. I have all of this filtering so that I filter the event correctly. But what I don't account for is the fact that I have an add-on here that does not take into account the start and end times. So I don't want to show any time slot if it doesn't match the start and end time. So what we're going to do is come out to our add-on. We're going to go into that. I need to duplicate my date start and my date end, because I'm going to need to pass those into the add-on so that it doesn't date end. And then I need to use that in this query, all records. So here I'm getting the time slot where the event ID equals the passed in event ID. I also want to add, so the event ID has to equal. And then I also want to make sure that the time slot start date is greater than equal to, just like we did in the prior one, this date start. And I want to also make sure that the time slot end date is less than or equal to the input. So not only am I filtering for the event in the main API, but I'm now also filtering the add-on data so that when I come back to the API, come back to my get event, we're going to run this query again, but this time slot of events should be doing the similar filtering on date range. The chances I get right. Oh, I broke something. Okay, so my add-on filter isn't working. Get no add-on at all. I should get that array below there. So let's come back over to the add-on and let's just run it and see. We're going to debug it directly, which I should have done, best practice originally, but I figured I just had it right, and that's not the case. Okay, and the event ID should be 1. Okay, so it does show that I brought back the one item, so that's working. And then let's do this. That's not what I want. If I bring back 2, and then I find the one item for number 2, but if for number 2 I make it 13 again, then I shouldn't find it, and I get nothing. So this is working great. I wonder actually if this, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, whenever I find out that my queries and my add-ons are not doing what I would expect, we've come back into the get event API. I'm going to do this what I would say the manual way. So I'm going to grab the URL and I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm going to hand execute this to see if we've got things working. So category ID equals 1 and date start equals 2021-01-01 and date end equals 2021-01-13. Let me just get that in case I lose it. Okay, so it looks like I broke a thing because here it's acting the same way. So that reinforces that I am missing something in, I'm going to say my API and my query all records. So let's go back to my, let's see, start date is greater than, that worked for us. Let's come down here And just out of curiosity, we're going to disable that to make sure that doesn't have any impact. And it doesn't. Okay. Oh, silly me. Okay, it popped into my head what the problem is. So I went in and I changed the add-on and I added date start and date end. What I did not do is come back into here and set that up. Now, when I click on this, you're going to think it is set up because when this pops up, it shows date start and date end from the input. But Xano is really good at when you have a matching variable name, it will match them up for you here. So this set it up in this input field for me automatically, but I wasn't smart enough to come in and save it and say that that's what I wanted. So now it's saved, and there we go. You had to wait all that time as I tried to figure out my problem. So now what you have is event 1, and you have all the time slots, just the time slots that fit within the date and time. And to prove that, I am going to come back out here to the database table in the time slots, and I'm going to go past January 18th. And now I should only have, so I've got this one that matches, but in addition, I've got both time slots, and I've now picked up, yes, okay. In messing with stuff, I've created another problem. You'll recognize it as soon as I tell you. ID 1 for the event shows up multiple times. The reason is, as I was trying to figure out that prior problem, I messed around with the distinct setting and I disabled it. So we're going to turn that back on because I only want one of each event. There's nothing to learn there other than I make mistakes and I tend to do a lot of them during these videos. So once again, I should see event 1 and event 2. And there we go. 1 time slot fits in the range there. 2 time slots fit in the range here. So that would be an example of how you use a join, how you use an add-on, how you extend that add-on to filter correctly based on how you filtered the events. So pass those start and end dates through to the add-on, as well as what distinct can do for you. And having the auto recognizing of distinct so that you don't end up with the duplicates. And if you remember, I mentioned ID, name, created at, category. As long as those are all the same, with the distinct set to execute, it'll make sure you only get one version of each of these. Now, if you want to see what happens, maybe this will be confusing, but if you hung on this long in this video, you're probably okay with that. What I'm going to do is show you how to make this non-unique, so you end up with duplicates again, even though we have distinct set to auto. And we're going to do that by using the eval. So if you happen to use the eval and you add in, let's say, the start date, so that we've joined to the time slot table, and we're going to add the start date. So now you see we have start date here. And by me adding that eval value into this upper section, the non-add-on section, this is now going to make this top section unique because the time slot start date for each of the event 1s are different. So what I'm going to end up with is duplicates of the events. Here's event 1. And you notice I have the time slot here. And there's event 1 again with a different time slot. And then the same for event 2 only had 1. So it only shows up once because of our filter, our query filter. So that is an example of kind of where you can get yourself caught up and wonder why things aren't working correct. These are all the pieces you want to consider when you're doing queries on how you want the data to go back to the user interface. Look at there we go. Every time I start to say there's slow time. So I can get rid of my duplicates by coming into here and deleting that and saving it. And now when I run it, you'll see that I no longer have duplicates. So this could be passed to a user interface very easily. And the user interface could show all of the high-level ID information, and then also separately show the time slots for each of those. That's really the end of what I wanted to approach here. I am not going to go into the filtering by text. You can actually see that in some of my to-do list videos, so there's no reason to waste your time with that. But the way to get back a hierarchical level of data, filter on category and date range, and show it in a way that's really easy for the user interface. The other way you could do this would simply be to not use the add-on, get back a list of category filtered events, and then when they click on Jill's Pilates, you could call back and get the time slots. So all of that depends on how you're building your user interface, but this allows you one call to get everything. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can ask questions either in the Xano forum or attached to my YouTube video, and I will get back to you pretty quickly, usually. Have a good one.